Toastmasters and welcome guests. I learned something new recently and I wanted to share it with you today. I'm guessing that most of you are like all adults. I think functioning adults have a lot of things in common in that we do a lot of ongoing education for ourselves. You probably have ongoing education perhaps for your job. Maybe it's a formal ongoing education like certification or something like that. For me, I have to read blogs in my line of work to stay on top of things. There are other kinds of ongoing education that you're probably doing as well. Maybe now, Chris, you're married, so there's a different tax laws, and then if you buy a house, my boyfriend just bought a car, there's different insurance that he has to follow. So as adults, we're always doing ongoing education for ourselves about these topics. And as I've been kind of going through the beginning stages of my adulthood, I've realized that I don't have a very firm foundation and I'm interested in learning more about politics. And so for the last couple of years, I've been paying more attention to the news. I've been reading and not flipping off the channel every time the news comes on because, I'll be honest, that's what I was doing. And there's a recent movement that I think is really interesting that's caught my eye, and I wanted to inform all of you about it today. So the topic is called Occupy Wall Street. It's in the title of my speech, and there are 3 key points that I wanted to tell you about today. There are way too many things in this movement to tell you about the entire movement, but in 5 to 7 minutes, I would first like to tell you what Occupy Wall Street is not. Second, I'd like to tell you what Occupy Wall Street is with a specific example. And finally, I'd like to tell you how this applies to us here in Austin. Since we don't live in New York City, we live in Austin. When I was first starting to research Occupy Wall Street, my first question and the first interactions I was having with this movement were very confusing. Many of the articles that you'll find at first are about how confusing and how there's no real point to Occupy Wall Street and all of these other topics. So I think you should set your expectations once you start researching this topic and be ready for that. And that was really confusing for me. And I think part of that confusion comes from a truth that one of our members here in Austin Toastmasters told me about, Brad, last week when I told him I was contemplating doing this speech on this topic. He said, no, you don't get it if you're looking for a specific point. And that's an example of what Occupy Wall Street is not. There's no specific set of objectives. There's no one point in time that everyone's trying to go to the ballot box on election day and do one thing or do another thing. There's no one candidate, there's no one political party, there's no one topic. It's in the second section of my speech, so I'll save that for a moment. I think one other way that a CNN article that I found made me realize that it's not like a book. This is what they said. It's not like a book. It doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. There's no conclusion that's going to wrap up Occupy Wall Street. That same article also said, kind of echoed what Brad had told me, which was, if you think Occupy Wall Street is going away, then you just don't get it. This was really good for me, trying to learn about this topic and educating myself. So second, I told you I was going to tell you more about what Occupy Wall Street is. And to flip over the analogy of the book, Occupy Wall Street is more like the internet. Would you ever say that the internet is finished, done? All right, done with the internet, sweet, all good here, we don't need any more of that. No, it's kind of funny, JT's smiling. You wouldn't really say that the internet is finished, right? That's because the internet's always changing. It may morph in 10 years and the internet is not at all what we are experiencing today, but the core of that will still be around. And that's part of what the Occupy Wall Street movement is about. The core, from my understanding, in the weeks that I've been researching, and the 6 weeks or so that it's been, or almost 2 months that it's been around, is that there's a need in our country to more closely pay attention to what's going on around us. And to me, that's all about educating ourselves as adults in the country that we live in. We need to know more about our politics, our social situation, our economy. And it's not just a political thing. So I've learned a whole lot about that analogy with the internet, because that really resonates with me. Finally, I wanted to tell you how this relates to us here in Austin. There are a lot of things going on at City Hall. People are occupying Austin, and they're occupying all kinds of cities around the nation to demonstrate and say, we're not happy, we're not really sure exactly what our objectives are right now, because it's only been happening for 2 months, and we want to improve on things that are related to the economy, things that are related to our social situation and our politics, but we're not 100% sure what those are. Just this weekend, it was really interesting, I found that, and I don't know how many of you guys heard about this, but on Saturday night, there were, over Friday, the City of Austin published some lists about what these protesters at City Hall were allowed to do and what they weren't allowed to do. And on Saturday night, around midnight, the protesters were kind of deemed as doing what they weren't supposed to be doing, and all of a sudden the police came out, and I'll back up, came out and started like walking at the crowd, not really telling people what was going on or why they were being moved, and so people didn't move, and a whole bunch of people got arrested. It was really interesting. It was a peaceful protest. There wasn't clearly laws being broken. There were some of these rules that were being broken that the City of Austin had passed just the day before. And I think this is a perfect example of just learning about what's going on in our community and thinking about what we think about that, because that may not be something that you have a problem with, but it may be something that you have a problem with, that people who are just protesting are getting arrested. So I had one quote that I wanted to mention that also came from CNN, and I hope this speech has helped you learn a little bit about what Occupy Wall Street is not, a little bit more about what it actually is, and how this is affecting us here in Austin. And there was an interview there was a great quote that said, the interviewer said, "How would you like to see all this end?" And the interviewee said, "I wouldn't like to see it end. I would like to see the conversation continue." Mr. Toastmaster.